Hello everyone and welcome to Split Second. Before starting, we would like to specially thank your waifu and Philip for supporting the show for 1 year. Philip is actually joining us today for a crazy match. This week, Helder brewed a Staxi Yasharn list. Late is piloting Ben's Lobe Draw Go Rashmi control. Philip brought his old baby Prosh, and Bal is piloting Lazar's Just Fireball deck list, a Patreon request which you can actually find a deck tech link in the description below. Before we show starting hands, we want to announce that we will be going to Lisbon for an upcoming CDH tournament, based on Tier 1 Con's rules and proxy policy. It is currently sold out, and due to the current global situation, its capacity is limited, but be on the lookout for upcoming tournaments where you can have a chance to battle for great prizes like duels and other CDH staples. Helder is going first and he mulliganed down to 6, keeping a crazy fast hand with a Brushland and Verdant Catacombs for lands, as well as a Chrome Mox and Mana Crypt for ramp, allowing for a turn 1 board to stack the table, Veil of Summer for protection, and to top it all off, he still found a Sylvan Library to refill his hand. He sent to the bottom a Plains. Late went second and mulliganed once. He was happy with 2 islands and a tropical one, alongside a Remorer for early draws, Ponder to dig for fuel, and a Mental Misstep for interaction, with a Whip for card recursion. Philip also mulliganed once and he kept a Taiga and Verdant Catacombs, paired with a Mana Crypt and a Birds of Paradise for ramp. Sylvan Safekeeper is protection, and Gamble and Natural Order are good tutors to maybe get Food Chain or Protein Hulk stuff. Lastly, Bal also mulliganed once and found an Ancient Tomb and a Marsh Flats for lands, with a Senses Divining Top for card selection and Mental Misstep and Pact of Negation for interaction. Demonic Tutor can be aimed at some combo pieces, and he still has a Wheel of Misfortune to try to refuel. Ready for this match? Helder starts his turn, warning the table that everyone will most likely hate him, as he plays a Verdant Catacombs and cracks it for a Savannah. He casts a Chrome Mox and strangely exiles a Gadok Tig, but it's not strange as he casts his Mana Crypt into a turn 1 Yasharn, and Philip and Bal cry as they look at their fetches in hand. Helder gets a Forest and a Plains and passes. Late gets to his turn and plays a Tropical Island, followed by a Mystic Remora. Bal attempts to misstep it, and Late instantly responds with his own, only to then realize they couldn't even do that in the first place, so Philip gets to his turn. He plays a Taiga and casts a Birds of Paradise before passing. Bal plays an Ancient Tomb and casts a Senses Divining Top, triggering Remora, but unable to pay. He uses the last floating mana to activate Top and then pass. This Taxi turn 1 deserves a slap from the Crypt, and maybe from the other players too, right? Helder plays a Forest and casts a Sol Ring, triggering the fish, and pondering on paying, but decides not to. He then casts a Sylvan Library, feeding the fish again, and after resolving he goes into combat. He attacks Bal with the Boar and passes. Late is okay with the Borsate, so he pays for the Remora to stick around. He plays an island and casts a Ponder. He dislikes what he sees, so he shuffles before drawing, and then discards to hand size before passing. Philip plays an Exotic Orchard and casts a Sylvan Safekeeper before passing as well. Bal also found a non-fetch land. He plays an island and simply passes. Helder takes another 3 from the Crypt and then pays 4 life to draw an extra card from the library. He plays a Brushland and keeps on attacking Bal with Yasharn. He then casts a Dranith Magistrate and follows it with a Tocatli Honor Guard, unknowingly shutting down Bal's top-decked Gilded Drake. It's now Late's turn, and all attention towards Bal lets him pay again for the fish, and beyond the draw-go plan of his deck. He plays an island and passes. Philip feels like doing something, so he casts a Gamble, unable to pay for the fish. He tutors for an Abrupt Decay, hoping to eventually deal with Dranith. He randomly discards an Underworld Breach, which doesn't serve much at the moment. He plays his Verdant Catacombs and passes. In his end step, Bal activates the top to rearrange it before going to his turn. He plays a Volcanic Island and casts a Wheel of Misfortune, triggering the fish but unable to pay. Everyone casts their votes and Bal takes 4, and both him and Helder get a new 7, while Late is happy with his handful of cards as well as Philip. Bal then passes, and on his end step Helder fires a Worldly Tutor, triggering Remora and not paying. Late responds with his Mental Misstep, paying the actual mana cost. Helder had forgotten about it, but he does respond with an Opton's Veil, further feeding the fish. He tutors for an Hellish Norn, hoping to start finishing some opponents. The Mana Crypt is finally forgiving, and he doesn't even pay life for extra cards. He plays a Plains and then proceeds to cast the Tutored Praetor. With it in the stack, Philip responds by casting an Abrupt Decay on the Dranith Magistrate, as he's about to lose his bird, triggering the fish but unable to pay. Helder goes to combat and Bal tries to defend himself, mentioning he has no black sources of mana in the board and maybe Late with 11 cards in hand should be the focus. Helder does send to Catelyn at late, but keeps pressuring Bal with Commander damage, who is almost there. In his second main phase, he still casts Leonine Arbiter to further stacks the table before passing. Late finally lets the Remora go. He plays an exotic orchard and then casts a Carpet of Flowers. He then goes to his second main phase, adding 2 green with the carpet, and casts a Wild Growth on his tropical island. He uses the other green to cast an Arbor Elf, and as he notices the mistake, he holds priority to cast Rapid Hybridization on Elesh Norn. He still casts a Sapphire Medallion before passing. Philip plays a Swamp and also casts a Dork, an Elvish Mystic, before passing. On his end step, Bal activates the top, further digging for outs. Bal gets to his turn and casts a Grim Monolith. He then follows it with a Windfall, hoping to find a better hand. Leto, however, responds with a Mana Leak, to which Bal responds with a delay, so the wheel resolves and everyone discards and draws 5. Bal plays a Wooded Foothills and passes. Helder gets to end his crypt roll again and decides not to pay life for the library. He casts a Grand Abolisher and then follows it with the Sovin's Reclamation, targeting his Dranith Magistrate in the yard. We're slowly getting locked again. He then casts his own Sensei's Divining Top and with the last floating mana casts a Thalia Guardian of Thraben. He proceeds to combat, sending a Sharn at Bal, who is now 1 attack away from dying, and the rest goes at late. Pretty much set up, Helder passes. Late gets to his turn and adds double blue with his Carpet. He uses those to cast Impulse, which is taxed by Thalia but reduced by the Medallion. He then casts a Merchant Scroll and pays for the Leonine Arbiter to be able to search his library. He finds a Cyclonic Rift and passes. Philip plays a Phyrexian Tower and casts an Oakham Adversary, also passing after that. Bal activates the top on his upkeep, digging 1 card further. He casts a Spellseeker as a mere blocker for Yasharn and passes. Helder gets slapped by the Crypt this time and draws only 1 card from the library. Quite a conservative guy. With Psych Rift in hand, Helder eventually sends all his creatures at late and Yasharn keeps going at Bal, who is forced to block or die. If the stacks wasn't enough already, Helder casts an Aethersworn Canonist and passes. Late gets to his turn and adds double brown with his Carpet. He uses it to cast a Grafdigger's Cage, and then casts a Baral, still able to overload his Rift. However, due to Grand Abolisher, the timing for it is a bit awkward. Philip draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He goes to combat and attacks late for 2 with a Grob, drawing a card. He finds and casts a Sensei's Divining Top, and passes. In Bal's upkeep, he activates the top to dig 1 card deeper, and finds a possible solution, a Wheel of Fortune. He tells Late that he needs him to Rift so he can have enough mana to Will, and this way they can clear Helder's board for good. So in Bal's draw step, Late overloads his Cyclonic Rift. Helder and Philip both activate their Divining Top to rearrange the top and then to draw the top card and put the top on top. So much top. Cyclonic Rift resolves and Bal gets to his main phase. He casts his Grim Monolith and cracks his Wooded Foothills for an Underground Sea? Well, I guess it was time for him to get into the Meteor Club as well. It should have been a Badlands, but it didn't influence much of the outcome of the game, other than Carpet. He then casts a Wishclaw Talisman, and with the last floating mana he casts a Wheel of Fortune. In response, Philip casts a Fire Covenant, paying 4 life and clearing Late's board, and as everyone discards their hands, we seem to be restarting the game. Bal then plays a Prismatic Vista and follows it with a Mox Ember and a Lion's Eye Diamond. Before passing, he does crack the Vista for a Swamp, before Elder can flash a possible Mind Sensor. When it seemed like a one-sided game, this took quite a strong twist. Helder plays a Forest and casts a Stony Silence. Bal desperately cries after dumping all his artifacts. But that's not it for Helder, he still casts a Root Maze and passes. Late gets to his turn, removes the last to spend counter from Mana Leak, and without any possible target, it is simply removed from the stack. He plays a tapped Yavimaya Coast and goes to his second main phase, triggering Carpet for 3 green, with which he casts his commander Rashmi Eternity's Crafter, before passing. In his end step, Philip cracks his Verdant Catacombs for a tapped Overgrown Tomb. He draws, plays a command tower and finally casts his commander, Prosh Skyraider of Care, getting 6 kobolds of Care Keep on his cast. Late ponders for a second but lets it resolve. Philip still casts his Sensei's Divining Top before passing. Bal gets to his turn and simply casts his commander, Silas Rand, hoping to deter some land attacks. In his end step, Helder casts Enlightened Tutor, searching for a Blind Obedience. He goes to his turn, plays a tapped Forest and casts the Blind Obedience. He then recasts his Sensei's Divining Top and pays white to extort. He passes and Late gets to his turn. He casts a Chrome Mox, triggering Rashmi and revealing a Nexus of Fate, which is put into his hand. Mox resolves, but he decides not to imprint anything. He plays a tapped Mana Confluence and goes to his second main phase, adding 3 blue with Carpet to cast Nexus of Fate. He goes to his extra turn, untaps, draws and plays a tapped Wooded Foothills. He goes to his second main phase and adds 3 green with Carpet to cast an Arcane Signet, triggering Rashmi and revealing a Muddled Mixture. Quite stocked up in interaction, he passes. Philip plays a tapped Nurturing Peatland and casts a Survival of the Fittest. Bal passes and late ponders for a second. Since he wouldn't be able to counter any incoming creatures, he decides to counter this with a hard cast Force of Negation. Rashmi triggers and he reveals a Sylvan Library, which he could cast due to Rashmi's trigger resolution, if only there wasn't a Grafdigger's Cage on his side of the table, so he puts it into his hand. Philip does respond to the Fawn with a Deflecting Swat, changing the target to the Swat. However, late responds with his Muddled Mixture, effectively countering Survival. Philip is going to combat and the table discusses attacks, as Late warns Philip that he will kill Prosh if it goes his way, and Philip is also not so keen on attacking Bal, as he could still stop Late at trying to win. Philip is missing 1 mana to recast Prosh this turn, but still decides to attack Late, who doesn't block, and he decides not to sacrifice any kobolds, just leaving Late at 1 attack from dying. In his end step, Bal casts a Chain of Vapor on the Stony Silence, to which Late actually responds with a Pact of Negation. Bal gets to his turn and fires a Vampiric Tutor in his upkeep, finding a Cyclonic Rift that can bounce any incoming Prosh or a Stony Silence. He draws it and then casts a Nihil Spell Bomb before passing. Elder gets to his turn and also casts his Survival of the Fittest, extorting it. However, Late is still packed and responds with a Mana Drain. Rashmi triggers and he reveals a counterspell. Will it ever stop? Elder sadly passes and Late gets to his upkeep and pays for the pact. He gets 3 green from the Carpet and 2 generic from the Mana Drain, which he uses to cast a Beast Within on Prosh. Rashmi triggers and it reveals a Birds of Paradise that he puts into his hand. He then uses the last floating mana to cast Sylvan Library and passes. Philip draws, plays a tapped City of Brass and attacks Late with the recently gifted Beast. On his second main phase, he sacrifices a Kobold to Phyrexian Tower for double black and recasts his Prosh, this time getting 8 Kobolds. Late ponders his options if Bal could go for a win after the Vamp Tutor, but eventually feels he's really behind, so he fires his counterspell on Prosh, triggering Rashmi and revealing an Ancient Tomb. Prosh is countered and Philip sadly passes. Bal draws and plays a tapped island. He ponders his options but decides to pass, fearing an incoming death from Extort triggers. However, in his end step, Elder casts an Endurance, and when it enters he targets Bal's graveyard, to which Bal feels forced to react. He lets the trigger resolve and then fires his Cyclonic Rift on Stony Silence. He then cracks his LED for triple red, discarding 2 cards he wished weren't on his hand. He activates his Wishclaw Talisman and he was thinking on going for a Final Fortune, but the list doesn't run it, so he tutors for a Snap, and gives the Wishclaw to Philip, eventually going to his last turn. Elder starts things by drawing the top card with his Sensei's Divining Top. He then casts a Jeweled Lotus and extorts. Paying green? Well, he had color mana for everything still. He then casts a Luminarch Ascension and extorts it as well. With green mana again? Double Mitra Club there. He still had white for it though. Bal is killed in the process and then Elder attacks Late with Endurance, forcing him to block with Rashmi before passing the turn. In his end step, Late cracks his Wooded Foothills for a tapped Breeding Pool. He goes to his turn and can only draw 1 from the library, finding nothing great. He casts a Ghostly Pilferer which enters tapped, as well as a Birds of Paradise, and passes expecting his demise. In his end step, Philip activates the top to rearrange it, and Luminarch Ascension gets his first counter. Philip gets to his turn and jumps right into combat, sending the Beast at Late as a special thank you. Late is no more, and on Philip's second main phase he casts an Eternal Witness, retrieving his Natural Order to his hand, which he casts right away, sacrificing the Eternal Witness as an additional cost, and finding Protein Hulk, which he proceeds to sacrifice to Phyrexian Tower for double black, triggering and finding a Viscera Seer, Melira, Disciple of the Vault and Lesser Masticar, presenting a loop where he sacrifices the Lesser Masticar to the Viscera Seer, triggering Disciple of the Vault and pinging Elder with it, and since it has persisted, it would return to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter. However, Melira prevents that -1/-1 counter from being placed, so he can sacrifice it endlessly until Elder dies. GG. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. Elder had a great start, but eventually couldn't finish the game in time, and with the reset of the game and all the focus on Bal and Late, Philip was able to come out on top. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, Stefan, TJ Rapp, Mike Purr, Ajimo, Uncrushable, Drunken Housecat, V, RJ, Heated Shield, Pina, Ricardo, Alex, and our new stack breaker, Dragon Steak. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing, or by becoming a patron yourself. If you want to go through other Commander adventures, click one of the videos on the right. If you want to talk with us about our games or other EDH related matters, join us on Discord. Join us again next week for a new set of Commanders and more decisive plays. See you all then!